In this step, we will discuss how our old genes are in mismatch with our modern environment. First, we will look at how people used to age in the past. We will share the insights of 9 years of fieldwork in rural Africa, in the Upper East region, in Ghana. Here, the environment still resembles the environment humans have lived in for thousands, tens of thousands of years. Not so long ago, we were all living in an environment where we had to invest a lot of energy in collecting calories from our environment, first as hunter or gatherer, and later as farmers. In all cases, we had a lot of physical activity and not a lot of calorie-rich food. Our bodies have evolved in this environment and have adapted to it. In this first video of step 1, I'm going to tell you the story of Hans and Kwaku. I was trained as a medical doctor, but I have left the consultation room and stopped my work as a practicing physician, because I believe I can better serve the health of people in the public environment. 2 people that I have met have led to this vision on health, and I would like to introduce them to you. First, I would like you to meet Hans. Hans was one of my patients that I met during my medical training at the Department of Internal Medicine. Hans is 68 years old, and although he was a very friendly and happy man, from a medical point of view, he has not aged in the most healthy way. He was a former smoker, as many men of his generation, and he developed a chronic cough from chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. Also, he was overweight, a characteristic that he also shares with over half of the men of his generation. Partly as a result of this, he has had diabetes for several years, a disease that he shares with over 1 million people in the Netherlands. When Hans walks, he has pain in his legs, and he has to stand still for a few minutes before he can continue walking again, because the arteries in his legs are damaged by atherosclerosis. And not only the arteries in his legs are damaged, also the arteries around his heart are damaged. And when I first met him, he had just had his first heart attack. Hans was a very kind man, but from a medical point of view, he was not a very special case. As soon as I brought Hans back into the waiting room, I saw a room full of people with similar conditions: obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular disease. Now, you might think that as a young medical doctor, this means there's a lot of work. But I decided to leave the consultation room because I met someone else. And that man was Kwaku. Kwaku lived in the north of Ghana, and I met him during my PhD research, where I studied how people age in the countryside in Ghana. An environment when there is no medical care, no antibiotics. Kwaku is 88 years old instead of 68 like Hans, and he was still vital and healthy. Kwaku was a farmer, like all people in the research area in Ghana, and he worked on the land every day. The first time I met him, he was plowing the land with a big ox and plow. He was pushing the plow into the ground with his weight while the ox was pulling him forward. When he saw me, he handed the ox to his son and he jumped towards me over the newly plowed fields and gave me a strong hand. His body was sweating from the hard labor that he had been doing since early morning. Kwaku was married to 4 wives, and he lived together with his 8 children and numerous grandchildren on his farm, which was a collection of simple mud huts. Kwaku was a very nice man, but he was also not a special case in Ghana, because many people in the research area that were lucky to live to a relatively high age were vital and active in the community. Of course, the lifespan of people in Ghana is much lower than the lifespan of the people in the Netherlands, but is largely due to a high child mortality. And for those people that do survive past the age of 5, they have good chances of living to high ages. We studied those older people in Ghana that did make it to 60, 70, 80 or even 90 years of age. These are some pictures that I took from Kwaku's friends. When I was living in Ghana, I found that people in Ghana aged in a beautiful way. I found that they had nice old faces that showed the years they had lived on the African savanna. As a medical doctor, however, I was interested to learn whether these people had not only aged beautifully on the outside, but whether they had also aged beautiful on the inside, whether they not only looked vital but actually were aged in a healthy way. That's why we investigated over 1,000 of these people with extensive medical testing. We performed electrocardiograms, ultrasound examinations, blood testing, etc. Of course, we already knew that cardiovascular disease was not the biggest problem of sub-Saharan Africa. Most people don't live up to high ages, but it really surprised us to find, if you study the people that do live to old age, 80 or 90 years old, that they age in a completely different way. course, Ghana is no paradise. People do also die here, and in higher numbers and at younger ages than in the Netherlands. They die from infectious diseases, malaria, tuberculosis, gastrointestinal diseases, snake bites, car accidents. However, they hardly suffer from the diseases that I saw every day in my medical practice here in the Netherlands. They age in a different way, and in some respects a more healthy way. Maybe we can learn something from the older Ghanaians. And in the next video, I will tell you more about the results of our medical investigations of the older Ghanaians.